Today we've been asked by Albion Online to make the first, second, and third place trophies for their Creator Crucible event. And we're really excited to do this. They gave us a lot of different choices, but the one thing that they really asked for is for these to look like artifacts. They don't want any plastic or any spray paint. They want all the colors to be done naturally how a smith would do them. After Ilya and I carefully looked over all the suggested items that they wanted made, we selected the two that we thought we could really produce those colors naturally. And today we'll be making the first place item, and that is the Kingmaker.
One thing to keep in mind as we're making these, we're not making them as weapons. We're making them as awards and gifts. Certainly they're functional, however, they have to be stylized closer to what the players in the game encounter as they're interacting with the media.
Most of the time you see Ilya or myself making Damascus on this channel. We're doing the hot cut, fold, put it back in the forge and keep going. That always saves us time and you're just allowed as a smith to keep going. However, this time we're running out of propane. So Ilya's gonna carefully measure out 4 equal parts, hot cut them up. When we go get some propane and fire the forge back up, we'll just restack those and continue on forging. For those of you that have experience playing Albion Online, you'll know that there's 2 versions of every weapon. The icon you see in your inventory and then the actual weapon you have in game. Now, one of the stipulations that we talked to when we were talking with the representatives of Albion Online is, yeah, they wanted it to be an artifact, they wanted it to have realistic colors, but also they want it to be a trophy. So they don't want some giant thing. Most of the weapons in the game are huge. So we were kind of puzzled for a minute and talking back and forth. We decided that it would actually be better to not make the in-game version of the Kingmaker, to make the icon, the one that's in the inventory. Besides, that's the picture that's in everybody's mind because that's what you see all the time. Every time you open your inventory and you have this sword equipped, you see that. So not only are we making something that's a more realistic size to be able to be shipped and handled by an award winner, but also we're still making the iconic version, at least in my opinion, of the Kingmaker. We're aiming for a bold yet refined pattern. That means we need to get our layer count at least 300, closer to 400. So after our initial 4 stack and then a couple folds, we'll be right on the money.
I've made many types of Damascus, twisted bar Damascus, mosaic Damascus, but my all-time favorite is random pattern Damascus. One of the reasons is I find it to be artistically more complicated. Well, it is more complicated in the sense that every single hammer strike is forever imprinted in the surface and will be appreciated by the ultimate owner. So, in a sense, the fingerprints of the artist frozen in time. In random pattern Damascus, there's an infinite possibilities for enjoyment and tracing each layer as it moves and interacts with the next one.
As Ilya stated, we are going for a random pattern Damascus, but to make it even more random, what Ilya is doing is adding some texture to each side of the bar. Then while it's still hot, running over the grinder, grinding that texture back flat, and then back to the power hammer to add texture to the other side, and then we can start drawing it out into the blade. Saves time, really breaks up the pattern, and adds a lot of chatoyance, which is basically that kind of holographic look that you get to Damascus when you etch it and polish it.
So I guess this is what happens when you stare for a decade at hot metal and your eyes go bad. So we thought that the sword was something like this in the image. But upon further consideration, it has to be something like this, with something like this on top of it. Well, that's entirely my fault, and what you see in front of you so far is two swords being forged out. This one will turn into something later. But we're going to proceed with this object.
So allow me to translate what Ilya just said. So basically, when we initially looked at this icon that we're making, we saw it as a very simple, like yellow color, golden color leaf blade. So that's what we started forging. And then we started looking at some of the in-game usage of the sword where it's much bigger, and you could clearly see that that white border around the icon wasn't a border at all. That's the actual edge. We hadn't noticed that. So what we have to do now is basically start from scratch. So let's go ahead and do that, get caught up to where we were, and continue forging.
All right, now that we're back on track, the first thing to do is to take our now wider blade and make it wider. Basically pinching out the edges and being super careful to leave as much material in the center of the blade as possible, so that we can create that really crisp ridge line. Remember, we're going for that blade within a blade look, that overlay but made all integral. So we have to make sure there's enough meat there to get that carving done.
Our choice for the first prize is Damascus. It's a very wide blade. The blade itself is very reminiscent of early Bronze Age swords, and maybe that's part of the inspiration for the gold center. However, we are employing actual techniques that would have been used in making a practical weapon. Obviously, this one is ostentatious. The very wide blade would have been normally used for devastating slashing motions And because it's short, it would have been very convenient for stabbing, much like the gladius would. Our choice to use Damascus is, well, it is the first prize, so it has to be special, and we're going to use actual stones. Red jasper in this case is perfect.
Before heat treat, my goal isn't to really do much of the sculpting on this blade at all. Just get it profiled, get it symmetrical, scuff off some of that scale so that we don't have too much decarb in the heat treat, and then get it off to Ilya so we can get the blade hardened and get right to carving.
The tradition of giving arms and armor to winners, victors, and heroes is incredibly ancient, and it dates back to prehistory. One of the most outstanding and striking examples is the gift from Athena and Hephaestus to Achilles of his aegis, his sword, his greaves, and his breastplate. Additionally, from Asia, we can remember the gift from Korea of the seven-pointed sword to Japan. And that one you can still see in the museum. Gifts like these, over time, acquire a sacred tint to them. They're cherished, and they signify an important historical event. In this case, the Crucible event from Albion Online.
With the blade now hardened, give it a quick clamp between two pieces of wood to ensure that it stays nice and straight while it slowly cools. After that, we can unclamp it, put it right back into the oven around 400 degrees, and let it temper, which turns the blade from being super hard and brittle to being very hard but very durable. Well, this is where the fun begins. Time to start the carving and create the overlaid look as we carve into the blade. We're going to start this off using a hand grinder just to kind of chunk it in, get those lines nice and crisp, and then we'll move to the grinder and just do what we do.
One of the biggest challenges about this that seems kind of subtle, but it's a blade within a blade. There's two blades there. And we have to be sure to keep the definition of those risers, very, very small risers, but they really give the illusion of a lot of depth. If I grind some of those away, grind any of that shelf away, we're gonna be kind of screwed and having to start over.
Symbolic prized weapons and armor continue to be given as gifts in tournaments way into the medieval era. And you can see that depicted in tapestries and paintings. And online gaming is a kind of tournament, and online athletes are kind of athletes, kind of combatants. They are the digital forms of nightly tournaments, and it is quite appropriate that Albion Online contacted us, sword makers, to make these awards.
While I stay steady working on grinding the blade, it's back to the power hammer for Ilya to begin forging the crossguard.
After the guard has been roughly forged and the hole for the tank has been punched, it's time to shoulder the sword. What I do, I heat up the guard once again and I just ram the sword into the space. That leaves a perfect imprint that matches all the imperfections that the eye might not see to the material itself. So the guard and the shoulders of the sword are now perfectly aligned with themselves.
That's about the right size. Right? No, no reaction. I'm carrying it.
So up until this point, we haven't really mentioned one of the key ways that we're going to create the blade within a blade type look. It's kind of simple, but also kind of risky at the same time, in that we're going to hollow grind that inner blade and flat grind the outer. As long as our hands are true and our eyes are steady, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. But if we grind away that ridge while we're doing it, man, it'll take a lot of work to either fix it or start completely over again. To me, one of the most classic shapes for a pommel on a sword is a wheel pommel. I mean, you can find disc-shaped pommels basically all throughout history, but the rise in popularity of the classic wheel pommel started around the 10th century and lasted for over 600 years. All the way up through the 16th century, there were wheel pommels in some form or another used on swords. And to me, the wheel pommel really is kind of the quintessential pommel for a knightly sword.
I wouldn't say that I'm nervous during this phase of the grind and polish. I would more so say that I'm respectful of the consequences that would happen if I messed up during this phase. So instead of operating and being scared or nervous, I'm just going to be very careful.
Even though this blade has had absolutely countless hours on a grinder, the only real way to finish some of this stuff out really is doing it by hand, doing a little hand sanding. There's a weird transition from where I had to kind of turn the bladed side into basically the shoulder that I just have to get out some of those bumps. And the best way to do that is to grab some sandpaper and just go at it. Not only that, but there's something to be said about hand sanding a sword blade. I've said it many times. I just feel like a blade deserves some handwork. It adds a little soul to it. And something that has kind of a modern hollow grind into a flat grind, I think it'll really add to the overall look when we go to etch it.
To achieve the look and the color scheme that you see in the digital art, we decided to create settings for the red jasper. The red jasper matches the colors that we see on the screen, and the settings will ultimately be brassed and will replicate the gold look. Now, what we did, we took some of the scrap Damascus left over from forging the blade and stretched it down to thin sheet. That thin sheet was dished out just a little bit to accommodate the stone, and then I go in with a jeweler's saw and cut out the characteristic crosses. Between the guard and the pommel, the negative and positive spaces are reversed. So what is red on the guard is gold on the pommel.
With the blade work now finally done, I'm now freed up to start working on the pommel. I'm going to do the bulk of the work on the lathe because it's the most efficient tool. Ilya will have to do quite a bit of fitting to each individual stone because they're not actually round, but I'll be able to chunk out most of the material for him.
To set the gems inside the pommel itself, Mac goes and employs all of his magnificent lathe skills to recess a little bit of the material. After that material accommodates about half of the gemstone thickness, I go in and fit it just right, because keep in mind that the stones are natural, so they're not perfectly round, and they're not perfectly lens shaped. So I work both with reducing some of the sizing on the stone using a masonry bit, as well as expanding a little bit of the pommel shape. After the gemstones sit in perfectly, I seat them with the cap. Our cap is our setting. The source material, of course, for these prizes is animated, so the color scheme on your screen will be different from the real materials. And we did not want to use paint, we did not want to use plastic. So we're using real metal, real stone to achieve the look. Now, in order to get the gold, we are going to use brassing. What happens when you brass metal is small amounts of brass dust gets deposited and burnished on to a different material, in our case, steel. That process happens when you heat up steel to about 400 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, 200 degrees Celsius approximately, and you use a wire brush made out of brass or bronze and apply it to the surface. The fast-moving follicles of brass heat up further as they come in contact with the steel, and creating a slow, very gentle, microscopic melting instance that deposits the brass, and as you keep going, more and more gets deposited. Now, what we decided to do, we decided to apply the brass to already etched Damascus. That way, the etched Damascus maintains all its structure, all its beauty, however, it appears gold. In the game, the handle of the sword is a pure black color, but we're using natural materials, so what we decided to do is we took a beautiful piece of black stabilized wood. It will add a lot of characteristics to the sword and will continue aging and evolving in its look and presence as time goes on.
Obviously in the game, the swords are very animated. That means when you see something blue, it's usually a solid blue. In this case, when you see something gold, it's solid gold. But the customer very specifically asked us to make artifacts, meaning something that looks real, something that could have been. So what we've decided to do is, yes, we're going to apply the brassing to all the parts and to some of the blade, but we're going to do it in such a way where we're not trying to completely cover the surface. And in some cases, we might actually remove some of the brassing to show the steel underneath, to show some wear. What we want to do is add a hint of color. Add the color to the blade, but let your mind do the rest of the work. You're going to see that it's gold. You're going to be able to tie it to that in-game item, but it's not going to sacrifice its artifact look. By adding the addition of wear on the pieces, we're not only giving the sense of age, but a sense of time, something that's existed for a while and something that has kind of been rediscovered. So yes, we're making a brand new thing, but we're giving it some extra history, if you will.
With this Kingmaker Sword build, we didn't make the huge giant version in game, but we really did accomplish making it have big sword presence. I mean, it's 5-6 inches wide at the base and just feels and looks like a huge sword, but it's still manageable and appropriately sized for a trophy. So I feel like we really accomplished all goals with this build, and I'm really excited to get it both in Albion's hands and the winner that deserves it. Kingmaker, check. Next up, the Twin Slayer daggers for 2nd and 3rd place, and we're going to forge them out of titanium. But you'll have to wait till next week for that build video.
Albion just released a major update, Radiant Wilds, on April 13th.
And it also releases on Xbox on April 21st.
So this is the perfect opportunity for new players or old players to come back and enjoy the brand new visual overhaul. Thanks again to Albion Online for sponsoring this video. We'll be sending these trophies to one of you lucky winners. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it and tell us in the comments below what items, historical, or your favorite items from video games that you'd like to see build next. And don't forget, subscribe to this channel. That works.